lost the regular, cause weird these days, just a bit too mundane. When someone I do the thing, I swing a plain Jane. Plain, regular every day.
All right. We're in the house. Joey Baloney's in the house. And episode -2, Regularity City. And Joey graciously graced us onto the episode -2 for Regularity City. And how are you doing, Joey?
Doing well. My number was called. I'm ready to bat. Hit some line drives and maybe some home runs, but who knows? We'll see.
Excellent. Yeah, he wants to hit home runs because the reason I got Joey on, because it's kind of like one of my arch nemesis is on the internet. And right, he's always owning me on the internet.
I mean, it's more of a humor exercise for me.
Yeah. I think that's why we get along, because we like to jab at the internet, throw some jokes out there, but also walk the line of, philosophy and politics and social stuff.
And absurd. Sure.
Yeah, the reason I got this show is because, well, part of the reason I think maybe some of the times we're trying to talk with people on the internet, like the only thing you can do is swing a big bomb at them or throw a T-roll move at them. You know, as a T-roller, you might just, because it's hard to communicate. So that's why I wanted to start this show. We got you on here so we can just talk about some different things wherever we're at, whatever we're thinking, you know?
Yeah, man. I think the internet is a really poor place to exchange ideas through text, though there leaves some sort of room for creativity and kind of branding your own attitude for sure, especially with like disagreements. I think it's just too easy for people to kind of like throw a bomb or a Molotov cocktail, as far as not so much a big idea, but kind of just like almost like a disbelief that the other person is holding opinion A or B. And what I always kind of get frustrated with is like, what kind of like world do you live in mentally when you're surprised that someone has a different opinion than you, if not just a little different, than like super different. Now, that being said, I think a lot of people react to tones in various comments to where the initial comment can set the tone for the discussion. But even then, I think people need to take everything with a grain of salt. But, you know, you have the right to be offended. That doesn't necessarily always make you right.
Yeah, you can be offended. And so do you find when you're on the internet, like strictly speaking, these text boxes, you know, that format, do you find good discussion coming where there's like persuasion going on, or is it usually just people kind of throwing up their own ideas? Like, this is where I'm at, and sometimes they get mad, maybe they don't get mad, but sometimes people are writing books, and I'm like, what are you doing? You're spending all day. Like, do you think much is happening with those little text conversations?
I think it's a case-by-case situation. Certain people are better at not just communicating ideas, but maintaining some sort of patience with other people, particularly strangers. I think what matters is if your goal is to have some sort of progression from a text exchange or even a conversation, the most important thing is to maybe hold on to, or I guess identify the level of good faith, bad faith between the two speakers and the groups that the two speakers represent, and even members of those groups that interject every now and then. For me, I would consider myself a hard leftist, but at the same time, I find it more valuable to be the bridge between liberals and leftists as far as like bringing them closer to my ideology. With right people that lean right of center or hard right, I think it's a little bit more fun for me, if not amusing, to kind of play with this provoke, but not so much just out of nowhere. Like, craft provocations are funny, but I'm more interested in like deductive reasoning, or like the Socratic method of just trying to figure out what you're thinking, if not convince you towards my way of thinking, by asking you questions. And with right wingers, I think it's a little bit more, it's almost just the first thing that comes to mind is throwing the rhetoric that they're kind of saying or standing behind back at them, like fiscal conservative economic policies and family values and the rule of law, like asking them if they really believe these things, what does that mean to them? And then usually the commonalities that I find between myself and right wingers is kind of more along the libertarian bridge of being anti-authoritarian and anti-big government. Now, everyone's their own isolated kind of greenhouse of ideas, so different people vary on a big spectrum, even amongst right wingers, centrist liberals, and leftists. I think right wingers, it's a little easier for them to unify behind ideas or causes because they're a little bit more unified behind nationalism, if not xenophobia, then kind of like a desire to preserve
like a in-house or like a in-group preference.
They're a little bit, and that helps to have that nationalism in there. With leftists, it's a little bit harder because they're, fighting over what is and isn't socialism when a lot of people are just trying to reallocate tax dollars away from pretty harmful corporations that are not only not giving back within the tax pool or the economy, but literally like taking the money outside the country.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. And when sometimes you want to throw something, it's not simply just to take a dump on the whole thing. It is like calculated in a way that it's like supposed to, maybe in that Socrates method, whatever you call it, Socratic, you're trying to maybe have something come up in their own, you're trying to poke a hole in their own idea, maybe have them question something, think about something differently. And the method might always be differently. But anyways, I get it. Well, introduce yourself. Let's introduce yourself. You got a funny mustache. Joey Baloney. I was on his show one time. Sex, Drugs, and UFOs, right?
With MC Homeless, that's right. That was
MC Homeless. Yeah, that was almost 2 years. That was like 2018 still, I think. And so y'all still doing that show? I think he moved away, right?
He moved away. It's on hiatus. It's just a matter of him getting his interface set up with his computer and, training him to be his own engineer, because I was the engineer for most of the show. And once we do that, I'm sure things will be smooth sailing. He's right by the beach. He's got so much relaxation time, I'm sure.
Yeah. That's amazing. I need an engineer. Maybe you come be my engineer.
Yeah, man. We can talk about it. We'll email about it.
Yeah.
That being said, I am third base Joey Baloney, retired baseball player, and now wrestling coach, political theorist, actor, director, screenwriter, six-string player, sore throats for Brontosaurus in this band called Death Crush.
Wow.
And master of all trades, jack of none. That's right.
That's amazing. Give it up for him. Yeah. Yeah, you do like hardcore music. I feel like I've seen pictures, but I never went to a show yet. Maybe after Corona, I can go see a show.
Yeah, man.
Looks cool. It looks like this guy's a rock star. He's actual, like, you could tell by look at his shirt and his hair and his mustache and his room. You can just be like, this guy rolls out of bed. He doesn't care. He eats a weird sandwich that's just like bread and mustard. And he like doesn't even drink till nighttime, but he's still rocking.
Gluten-free bread hummus. That's my weird sandwich with some sprouts, maybe some kale on there.
Are you vegetarian right now?
No, but I definitely feel better if I eat more plant-based food throughout the week. Now, grew up in a Mexican household, so I love pollo guisado and carne asadas and stuff like that. At the same time, I literally feel crammed up if I eat too much meat. Like, you can feel it in your body. Your body's kind of like, stop doing this to me.
Yeah. And plus, if it comes, you're going to have to probably eat the rich one day. That's going to be kind of tough on the stomach. You're going to want to be prepared for that when you eat these rich humans.
I hear a human tastes like pork, and I'm sure rich humans are able to take care of themselves a little bit better. So I'm sure it'd be a finer quality meat.
Yeah. So are you straight up, are you a communist or a commie, or what are you?
That really depends on who's asking. And as far as generally I tell people I'm a leftist, because that's generally all that I care to define as far as the context of politics in the United States in 2020. What I find that's a little bit frustrating about the online left is they're kind of almost obsession with getting into win unwinnable fights with interior fighting, because they'll talk about what is and isn't communism, or what is and isn't socialism, and get bogged down into not only irrelevant in a modern sense details, but they'll start to be apologetic towards authoritarians like Joseph Stalin and many others. And it's just kind of like so unnecessary, to where I get it if you're trolling right wingers and you want to
Becoming like that kind of, it's like memetic in a sense, and that happens on the right
yeah,
too, where they're throwing Nazis up and they're throwing or swastikas up, and they're saying it's almost
it's
like to be super edgy, and it's kind of gay sometimes, right?
it's definitely self-memeing, and the right is not innocent of this too. They tend
Mm-mm.
to be a little bit obsessed with iconography, and I guess trying to define their identities through past cultural icons, particularly like authoritarian ones. And it's nerdy on all grounds. I, being a professional wrestler trainer, one of my heroes is Classy Freddie Blassie, and I do wage war on pencil neck geeks, both right and left. Um,
Yeah.
uh, the actual idea of communism, I'm all about. Yeah, I guess, anarcho-communist, to where you're both an anarchist and communist. That's the like goal. That's like, yes, we would all like to live in that Star Trek communist world 200-300 years in the future, to where
Is it
we're
possible though, or is it kind of idealistic and utopia-esque? You think it's possible?
sure. I think anything's possible. It just takes the labor and effort of not just one person, but even many generations. Again, I think fighting for what you believe in and what you want to see in the world is an eternal battle, and you
Mm-hmm.
need to peace in that and understand that, and even start to become comfortable with the idea that what you're fighting for, you might not even get to see as
Of course,
this. And
it's bigger than you, and that's when you know your heart's in it. If you're like, I'm doing this for future generations, for future family, countrymen, or world humans, whatever, right? You're down for
and
the
I
cause.
have, as cool as I am when I roll out of bed, I have my moments of like doubt and
What?
days. I wish, I didn't ask to be born. I exist without my consent, kind of attitude.
Ah, you're
But
bitter towards God, or are you depressed? Do you get
no,
depressed
no, not
sometimes?
even bitter. Well, yeah, it's not even bitter towards an individual. It's just essentially just a feeling of feeling stuck. And I think the more you take care of yourself and the more active you are, the easier it is to pivot or step out of those situations. But as far as me being a communist, though, like, yeah, communism is basically the workers having control over their means of production, and there being a more egalitarian setup between and relationship between the owners of the property, the means of production, and the actual fruits of the labor, with the labor being the bridge and the blood flow that goes in between both your theoretical leader in the system and all of the workers.
And the critique
And
often will be like, is the lack of competition going to exist? Is that going to hinder growth and prosperity? How do you answer to that when people ask you that?
so, so capitalism as it exists today is not necessarily a free market. You have a concentration of few people
Yeah.
owning everything, to where they actually prevent competition in a lot of ways. Like, I don't know if you've ever been to cities out in the middle of nowhere, but like sometimes there's only one internet provider or one
Hmm.
provider of some sort of utility.
Only one
And
Walmart. Only one Walmart. We should have
yeah, yeah.
three, four.
So these problems exist not just in more socialistic or communistic examples throughout history, which a lot of us argue that weren't particularly good examples of communism or socialism in practice, due to world foreign policy decisions being made by the United States at the time, post World War II, and even before that. I think competition is at its peak when people have basic necessities met: food, shelter, the home. Or I guess those are the same things: food, shelter, and access to healthcare. Basically, if something goes wrong, like a sports injury, or you have to get your gallbladder removed, or you get cancer, the tax dollars that we all pay in the richest country in the world should go to those costs, not bankrupting you just because you had them. There's not just preventable diseases and ailments that come about, but things that just happen randomly, like cancer or blood clots or even like aneurysms, stuff like that. Autoimmune diseases that come out of nowhere. What the fuck is that? You get that, and not only can you not function like the rest of your life that you imagine, you follow your dreams, but you're going to be in debt for the rest of your life. I mean, there's a lot of barriers to entry as far as just being able to compete.
Yeah. What to you is what defines like a good society, like a prosperous, a nice society? What do you say that entails?
I think a nice society, prosperous society, entails, again, a good relationship between the individual and the community, because the community is theoretically supposed to be the individuals collectively. And especially in a situation to where by living in a community or in a society, you agree to this kind of abstract social contract. I'm not going to harm you. You're not going to harm me. If I'm nice to you, I guess expect you to be nice to me. But if you're not, then that's okay. I don't expect anything in return. You want some sort of resources out there that's, time is precious and we're all only one person, so we can't do everything that we want to do. The disciplines in life are so great and overwhelming, but time is so finite, so where you can't be the doctor, the librarian, the farmer, and the businessman all at once. So you rely on community. Production of things takes teams with anything, not just creative, but like functional farm work, industrial work, and stuff like that. I think a good society is basically a society that takes care of its people, not necessarily even for moral reasons, but just for economic reasons.
So to boil it down, maybe a good society is a healthy community,
Yeah.
right? How would you boil it?
Healthy community that feels safe in communicating, because a lot of problems come from weaknesses and breakdowns in communication, and that breakdown in communication is often caused by people feeling repressed or feeling like they can't express something in a certain moment.
Sure. And so when you say aren't you like anarcho-commie? So is that a lack of a state? Do you not like the state?
So there's different variations of this. I think the state as it exists today is the U.S. federal government, our local state governments, and our local county and city governments. There's different variations of the state. I think we're in a really, just to carry a phrase from, I think you've posted some of his memes, but Jesse Lee Peterson, we're in somewhat of a fallen state as far as government's concerned, because we've basically baited out as a government to large corporations who have not only taken more control than sovereign governments, but wield it to where it's not a contract anymore of, okay, we're going to invest in your company through subsidies, and then you're going to provide for the community in that area or even federally. It's just you get this money, no strings attached, and then they can do whatever. And even if
they're growing in like this crazy amount of power, the corporations. If you look at like Bezos and Apple and that kind of stuff, right? It's kind of nutty. It's kind of ridiculous.
I don't see the state in itself as just having to be a government, which I think is hilarious when a lot of conservatives tend to always point out examples of government being inefficient or slow or weak or even too oppressive and authoritarian. Corporations fill that void of power for sure. They concentrate power up at the top, they maximize profits for themselves, and then they basically rely on the poor conditions of the economy to keep people locked into their shitty jobs. And they also do this by pressuring what they can do in their personal lives. And that is just as much authoritarian and acts like a state than like the United States government does, or the CIA does, or the USSR did.
I see, but
so as far as anarchism in itself is just strictly, generally, the most broad definition is just being against unjust hierarchies. And what does that mean? It just means being against people being in powerful positions and using power in abusive ways, and also people that aren't necessarily qualified for that position get that position consistently, whether it be through nepotism or just failing up as you're in a certain company.
Because you mentioned like people, workers, and a leader. So do you agree that hierarchies are inevitable with the human species? I mean, you played baseball, right? Wasn't there a hierarchy to that, or isn't there, or teams, or groups? Isn't there a natural hierarchy between people?
Sure, there is a natural hierarchy, and anarchism is not against hierarchy. Just the idea that it's against unjust hierarchy, to where, say, it's the Coach Johnson's son takes over for head coach, but Coach Johnson's son doesn't fucking like baseball, and he's just there for the money, and the team suffers because of that. He gets his paycheck, but the team fucking loses every time. It's more against that and more into trying to find a qualified, the best baseball coach out there, as opposed to just letting the son take over.
Yeah. I feel like some people would be like, well, communist, it's going to be like, we're just going to make all the baseball coaches, they're all going to be, they're just going to throw a bunch out there, and they're just going to decide, all right, you guys are baseball coaches, or will there even be time for baseball? And what about this? How do you have a safe, so how do you said a healthy community, and safety was an aspect of that. How do you propose safety in a community? Like, there has to be some kind of state, like Law and Order. Don't you like Law and Order?
Yeah, do you?
I love it, yeah. Like,
what do you like about it?
Well, I like order. So I come from chaos, and I mentioned before, like, I've overcome bipolar when I was, so I think I was born with extra amount of openness, and I was also, I think a lot of people have slight traumatic experiences, kids, and then I got into drugs, and then I lived wrong, and those things combined with society, I became bipolar for years. I was psychotic and went into different hospitalization periods and mania and all that kind of stuff. And the whole lifestyle I was in was very disorderly. And so I think I came to order, through systems of improving my big five conscientiousness trait. I think that, like, doing systems to make conscientiousness a goal or a system, lowered some of that extreme openness, and then managing energy brought me to order, and then finally, Jesus Christ, God, and stuff like that, Christianity brought me even more in order. And so order to me is like safety, right? Law and order. So you have laws, and those laws are like implemented and or followed, and that sort of thing. Because it's right now, it's Corona time, right? It's Black Lives Matter, it's riots, people are like, it's getting that sort of thing.
I think, coronavirus and Black Lives Matter protests bursting out kind of like at a more rapid rate. Those are two different issues, but I think the level of economic insecurity is definitely at a subtext, at least, of those protests that are foaming with anger. And I think they're justified in their sense of kind of pointing the finger at this moment as far as reacting to the unjust murdering of men and even kids by police. I think order, and even law and order, theoretically, there are still neighborhood watches, and order can exist outside of a state-sanctioned police department.
Those white guys got themselves in a pickle right before. Remember with that one guy, the jogger guy? Those one white guys got themselves in a jammy because they tried to police the.
But those weren't even cops. Those were just white dudes.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You're talking about neighborhood watch, because I agree that's a form of order, right? Like,
yeah, but I mean, they weren't part of a neighborhood watch. There were two guys with guns.
Yeah,
a neighborhood watch does include like order and meetings and training, just like knowledge with a gun. Like, I find a lot of people seek guns for the wrong reasons. Now, being a leftist, I'm by no means against guns. If anything, I'm couple steps away from joining the Socialist Rifle Association.
Mm.
I think people should buy guns if they want to, especially if you're free to do so. That being said, I think just like any weapon that can cause harm, you should respect it and educate yourself about it and give it the respect that a piece of engineering that can cause death demands.
And with the
And I think people get guns for the wrong reasons. And if you're getting a gun out of fear or even anger, I think you should do some soul seeking. If you want to get a gun because you want to learn about it and shoot that fucking gun the best you can, do it.
Yeah. And when you talk about like the protests, you say maybe that's an uprising, like that's a feeling of we're not, like that whole thing you say, what the society like is a baseline where everyone's taken care of. So you're kind of saying everyone's not taken care of, so they're uprising a bit, right? But I find like I bet a lot of these people, like it's perfect storm with the corona because it shut things down. And then so a lot of these people are not working, and I imagine a lot of them are getting unemployment checks, if not welfare or this and that. And now they have all this time to go cause a ruckus based off of anger, hatred and anger within them that's been pushed on them through media manipulation, big media and social media manipulation.
All media manipulates you in one way or the other. It's a matter of it being, again, good or bad faith, which means are you serious about what you're saying or do you have ulterior motives? And I think, the anger that's been fomenting is nothing new. It's just, yeah, we're in a unique situation that we should all be so lucky to have as creative people, right? That to where all of the problems in this country and even the world have freight trained right in our faces all at once, to where people aren't just going out and protesting because they have nothing better to do. It's they're seeing these giant corporations not only make billions more off of this pandemic situation.
I think a lot of the general public's ignorant of that.
Dollars that we put into every paycheck are just going nowhere. We're getting the crumbs of the paycheck of the taxes that we pay. What do you pay taxes for? Do you know?
I agree. We should be getting money.
We don't live in that world. We don't live in a world to where we can legally see taxation as that.
Yeah.
So I'm always interested is like, because we have to pay taxes. If we don't pay taxes, government's going to put us in a box in a jail.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we pay taxes? And because we have to pay taxes, what do you want to see those tax dollars go to?
I agree. I'm like a socialist right now because I think they should be the Republicans should be shelling out some dough to the common man because they can, and that would help ease things up a bit. And it's election time, that would help Trump win.
And especially with I think,
and they give so much to everybody else.
Yeah, like all of these financial entities got bailed out the fuck out unprecedentedly. Exponentially bigger than 2008, which even that was a nefarious step in the wrong direction.
And that's not market capitalism, right? That's the sort of an element of this sort of crony commercialized, right? Isn't it?
It's capitalism. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a free market.
It's not a free market.
At the same time, whenever your unregulated capitalism is a free market in some ways, it's a free market is not necessarily the healthiest market as far as like no regulations or rules.
Yeah,
a free market. I think the term should suggest that anyone has the freedom to buy and sell whatever they want, and that's whatever they want. Now, there should be laws to protect vulnerable people from being exploited, like children, elderly, and people of color, and even poor people. Now,
can't say that on this podcast.
Should they be laws on the books, or should they be expectations? I guess that's going to be, again, case by case situation, because laws can be used for good or bad, no matter what they are.
Sure. Yeah, and so socially, we're usually on a different plane as well, right? So, are you atheist, or are you spiritual, or are you Jewish? You look a little bit Mexican.
I am Mexican.
Yeah,
I grew
knew
up in
it.
a Catholic-ish family, and my parents were a little bit more progressive than the rest of our Catholic family. And so we went to church once a week and did all the Catholic stuff, and I got my first communion. And I remember thinking, like, I remember not ever really being afraid of God, but wondering things of like, is there really a hell? What would that really be like to suffer forever? Is there a heaven? Would it get boring? Stuff like that. And those thoughts come through you.
Yeah.
But as you're in church, especially when you're a kid, I start to zone out even now a little bit naturally. Sometimes if I'm in a big ornate area. And as a kid, I would notice like paintings on the walls, this architecture, not just outside, but inside, the stained glass, and just the images of Christ suffering through these 12 stages of the cross. And it almost instilled in me an appreciation for not just classical, but even modern art, to where eventually getting lucky enough to go see the Vatican as an adult, I was like maybe 18-ish. And it was gorgeous. Now, all of this gorgeous things to look at have some deeply violent past occurrences that happened, but that doesn't take away from the physical thing you're looking at and what that's making you feel inside.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, as an adult going through college, I guess I did like at some point identify that I wasn't a Catholic believer in God, because even before then, it was right around the time that the Catholic Church and Pope Benedict the 16th started getting the last pope started getting in trouble for all these stories coming out that he like hardcore covered up for a lot of pedophiles in the Catholic Church, and that's what had him step down. And so I'm not sure if it was that specifically, but my mom stopped taking us to church when I was a teenager, and so and she would say things like, "Oh, culturally Catholic," and I'm like, "What does that mean?" Okay, so that's a whole other thing to unpack. But as an adult, I remember thinking like, you're around a bunch of other young people like you, and a lot of people in that age, especially in an academic institution, start to like identify as like agnostic or atheist. The closest to that I came was maybe thinking that I was agnostic, but going into leaving my 20s and 30s, I never stopped. Pop show. Hey. Dude. Come on.
Hey, doggy.
Hey, he's a good guard dog, so he barks at anything that like goes by the door.
Yeah.
So I
You
remember.
need to share some food with him.
Yeah, for sure.
Thinking him up.
My sandwiches together.
Yeah. So you felt agnostic maybe at one point, or
A little bit, but I identified that I always would think about our origins within the universe, and also just deeper, more expansive things like quantum mechanics and what reality really is. Even going, is our God the one and only God for this universe? Is there other gods, stuff like that? Or are we just like flesh and blood bags of extensions of a deeper consciousness that's out there, that's not even maybe a guy or a girl in a robe that's elderly or whatever sitting on a chair? So I kind of did identify that I was a spiritual person, and I joined a church called the Church of the Subgenius. You should look it up if you guys haven't heard it. Originally an art collective that likes to, they're basically a satire of both capitalism and religions. Their books are great, but they do have this.
is that in Austin?
Kind of
Do you go here in Austin?
It had chapters in Austin. It's originally based in North Texas around Dallas, but their whole thing is basically like to identify the power you have as an individual in the advertisement agent run worlds, to where you can wage psychic warfare against people and institutions that are doing it to you. And sometimes not only does that get you attention and sometimes in trouble, but it enables you to be seen as a leader, a creator, and even eventually the president of the United States. Who knows? I am an ordained minister through them and the Universal Life Church, and I do believe in something bigger than me. Again, as far as going back to my Christian roots, I find Gnostic Christianity very fascinating, and there's this whole world of writings that weren't included in the Bible as it exists today, because the Bible as it exists today is a product of the Roman Empire, and it's a particular Roman emperor that wanted to organize all of these Christian writings about 300 years after the fact, or the supposed fact, to unify Rome, because it was kind of crumbling behind this new burgeoning Christian religion.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah. So I'm a spiritual person. I'm an ordained minister. Do I believe in God? Yes and no. Do I believe that Jesus Christ is the Lord and Savior? I think he was a really cool guy with a lot of cool things to say. Um, he is an egalitarian through the writings that he is at least quoted in saying in, and he also isn't afraid to use um, psychic warfare against people that slight him and his disciples and people in general. Usually, he cared about being a champion for marginalized people, and that being poor and socially outcast people like prostitutes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think he championed. He went everywhere, right? He went to the low to bring them to up. So that's all sounds very confusing. Like it seems like you don't know what you believe or you're lost. Are you gay and straight, or are you just straight?
No, I identify as a pretty cis person. Now, sexuality is a fluid spectrum. Um, I think, have I been attracted to men before? Maybe like emotionally attractive. I
Yeah, do
think
you
some
believe in
people
like
are,
the 1 to 10 sort of that 1 to 10 sort of thing? Like I'm a 2 gay maybe, or I'm a
I
2.
mean, there's something to be said about that, but sexually attracted to women. I can find men cute, adorable, and maybe even want to cuddle with them sometimes. But as far as like if we're cuddling and you start to put a
Beta!
finger in, then I think that's a little past my comfort zone at least.
So you don't mind cuddling with guys, or you can find them cute, or
Sure.
yeah. But you've never been gay.
No, I've never had a moment to where I genuinely wanted to have sex with a man. Though, I mean, I guess everyone has intrusive thoughts, so I guess, try to imagine what that would be like, and
Yeah,
it's
even I've done that. It's
never really
disgusting.
exciting. Though that's just me. I think other people, who knows what drives other people because you can only know you, right? You can only try to talk to other people.
Yeah.
As far as being gay being a sin or anything like that, as far as morally wrong, I don't think so at all.
You're pro gay, right? And you're pro, you take it 1 step further, you're pro trans, right? Or you like trans ideology or
I'm
sick.
pro trans people, absolutely. Yeah.
You don't think it's a mental health issue?
Gender is a spook for sure.
What? Gender's
Gender is a spook. It's there to
a spook?
at least, yeah, it's not as real as sex is.
Trans people are spooky though,
How?
because it throws you off. It's almost disturbing. It's like when you see an altered image of yourself, and like my sister would show my mom these filters and stuff, and it'd be a weird face, and my mom would be disturbed by it. That's how I look at some trans people. I'm like, I see it's a man, but it's all they've taken things that change their chemistry and their hormones. It's almost disturbing to look at. Or I'll see a hot chick like Blair White is probably the hottest one I can think of, right? The conservative guy or girl. You know that guy?
I mean, yeah, if you're into really bad faith liars, I would say Blair White.
You think she's really a woman?
Yeah.
Oh, she's a
She identifies as a woman.
yeah,
That's
but
all.
she's a liar,
That's
like
what
just
makes
as
you a
a
woman.
cultural person, like her.
What makes you
What?
what makes you a man?
A man?
Hmm?
Well, I mean the biological aspect. Then I would say there's a spiritual aspect to being a man, and a man is a leader, provider, and protector. That's what I look at man, and it takes responsibility. That's manhood in my eyes. Like that's a side. That's
Okay.
more of the spiritual idea, and then I would say the biological is like the chromosome thing, and then your penis and all your facial structure and everything. You're like a guy. You don't have any titties unless you're fat.
And again, like it's scientifically proven that sex and gender are two things. It's really the only thing that makes you a man is that you identify as one. Now, your ideas of a man being a leader and stuff like that, being strong, these are specific to this culture, at least your culture and the United States culture generally, Western culture. It's not been like that everywhere for the dawn of time. I think we know transgender people have been around since there's been historical documentation.
Why is it so popular now? Isn't it more
I think
popular?
because people are feeling a lot less scared to identify as who they feel inside, because we just are in a more forward thinking progressive place than we were back in the 70s or even 50s or even 80s or even 90s in a lot of ways. That being said, there's still so much work to do as far as trying to step towards an ideal world.
And do you think someone that's gay or deals with the same sex attraction, if they claim that they were gay and then they claim to have overcome that and now to be straight, would you call that person a liar or
Because
fluid or something?
I find gender or gay
Sex.
conversion or even trans conversion therapy, keep it to gay conversion therapy right now.
Yeah.
I think the practice in itself is abusive, and it's rooted in an unjust hierarchy of some sort of Christian or even just straight up Western
You
kind
don't
of
think it can be
background.
secular? That sort of thing can be secular?
There's, I'm sure there's secular gay conversion therapies out there, but even this more secular people or people that identify as atheists or secular, a lot of the prominent ones tend to hold Western patriarchal beliefs, like that Christianity's less evil than Islam, or that men should be men and women should be women, or whatever you want to say about that. Gay conversion therapy is in itself not a good thing for the psychological health of not only that individual but the community, in my opinion. Now, if someone wants to say they were gay before and they're no gay no longer, I'm going to take their word for it. I'm not going to tell them you're an asshole, you did something abusive, because I can only go off the context that they're telling me. I'm not going to interject what I think about somebody that I haven't gone through and tell them what's what, because they can only tell me what's what about their own sexuality.
Sure. And so that idea of it being abusive or whatever, is that based off of some books you've read or research on a collection of people or some anecdotal experiences or just your ideas
And
of what it maybe seems like?
all of the above. I think, especially with people that are in institutions, whether it be, let's be real, all of these gay conversion therapies do come from religious backgrounds. And a lot of it does have to do with wanting to be a part of a community and not wanting to be an other for your whole existence. Now, that's someone making calculated decisions where they want to live their lives, how they feel inside, or do they want to not stick out and be a part of this bigger community? There's going to be sacrifices made in either situation.
Is it possible that it could come from their own internal compass of God and being like, this doesn't quite feel right, like I'm having sex in this guy with this guy where he poops out of, and it just doesn't seem like it's gonna make a baby even though I keep trying? Like, do you think they
I don't
low-key
think
really believe they're gonna get each other pregnant having sex like in the pooper, in the butts?
you only have sex to get people pregnant.
I think it's not only one or anything. I think this is a part of that I've come to understand because I quit having premarital sex, about a year and a half ago. Maybe
Okay.
on your show I was yeah, your show is one of the only episodes I was still in another realm.
I
So,
think I
because
remember.
I was talking about getting fingered in the butt and having sex with old chicks and, wanting to have a sex with a whore on my bucket list. So it's so funny because that's really the only
You
stamp. I mean, you can listen to a
solid
lot of
work.
my music and hear this degeneracy I preached and practiced, but I've come past that. And talking about sex, as I look at it like the Christian way, and what I can see easily is sex is a union. It's not just one thing. It's pleasure, and it's a union between you and a person, like a coming together, and it's spiritual and it's physical, and you're also under the umbrella of God, and it's a commitment, and it's also procreation. So it's pleasure, procreation, and union. And I think when you take one of those things out, you kind of create something that might be destructive. Like I think kind of Jesse, like I really, I like Jesse Lee Peterson, and been an influence, but I think he kind of has it a little twisted in his head. Like he's almost like the sex is gross kind of guy. You only do it for procreation. So I think you do that, you imply that on a society too much, then you're going to have some kooky backlash, a sexual revolution. Or if you say, hey, we're just doing it for pleasure, we're just coming on girls' faces everywhere, we're putting bags around our penises and mocking sex and just ejaculating in these bags, we're changing girls' hormones with birth control pills. That's kooky. That's what we're on now. So people are like having all this pleasurable sex. It's like being animals. And then they'll tell you, well, humans are just animals. Like, well, maybe you are. I can tell you are because you're doing all this animal stuff. But I'm like a evolved human. I'm a spiritual being, you know, a man of God or whatever. You feel me?
Yeah, I mean, I guess all of these terms like enlightened and evolved and spiritual person are subjective to whoever's saying them. I think what you said and what you're encapsulating sex as is very loaded, and it's a lot of baggage in there. And you know, more power to you if you want to put all of those in the idea of sex. Now, biologically, sex is, you know, the act of attempting to reproduce, but there's also, I mean, other species do have sex for pleasure. That's other mammals do even.
But they're not. They're just animals, though.
Okay. They still have the cognitive ability to have sex for pleasure, though.
Yeah, that sounds like some dogs are gay.
So let's get a little bit more based in this. Would you rather live in a controlled society or a free society?
I want to be free. Yes. I don't want people to, I mean, this is a cultural thing, right? This is like more, I want to be free. I want people to be free. Yeah. But I don't think we should accept all this stuff socially and culturally, like our next door neighbor. Like, I don't like the rampant acceptance of that kind of stuff.
A lot of that acceptance is manufactured by the corporations at the time, the people that have the power. So there's going to be, you know, certain social norms that aren't necessarily natural, but they are norms because they've been around for so long, or they're encouraged. As far as having sex casually being a negative thing, it can be, but at the same time, everyone's different and everyone has different needs as far as like the deeper psychological needs beyond needing food, shelter, and, you know, basic healthcare. I think you know, if coming a lot and having sex with multiple partners, even the same partner outside of wedlock, brings you pleasure, you should do it. And you know,
and that's kind of a theory that would have to allow for abortion, right? So you'd be pro-abortion, pro-choice, or whatever.
Pro-choice for sure, I think.
And that way you can have pleasurable sex, and then you can kill the life. So it's like satanic.
What is satanic?
Satanic is just evil. It's like against God's patterns. It's like man trying to imply and push forward his own patterns rather than abiding by God's patterns, which bring true freedom, true life. So satanic is against God's patterns.
Like taking from the poor and giving to the rich and stuff like that.
Taking from the poor and giving to the rich. I mean, I don't like robbing a poor person and putting
children in cages.
You know what I do? I rob poor people, and then I go give the money to people that are more poor.
Oh, wow.
How do you like that?
You're like Robin Hooder.
Yeah.
As far as
I'm the Wigger Robin Hood.
I lean towards the libertarian inclinations of people should do whatever brings them joy and pleasure, and if it's consensual, for sure. That's the big designator of those sexual acts. I don't think that sex necessarily, or having too much sex with multiple people, is what takes away from a society or even an individual's essence. It's a matter of, why are you having this sex for? Is it to fill some sort of void in you? Then yeah, doing anything to fill a void, as opposed to realizing that happiness and peace is within and not out there.
I'd say it's most often for not necessarily a void, but to soothe. And people, as far as a society, it's like, isn't there research that says I guess you have to believe in the family, you know, like, isn't there research that would say having all this sex with all these partners, it's harder to pair bond. It's harder to have this like cohesive society. I mean, don't you think it's best for a kid to have their mom and their dad raise them?
If you want to have a family, yeah. But again, the atomic family is a relatively new concept. it has only been around for a couple hundred years, maybe, because especially in Europe, in medieval Europe, in Renaissance periods, the family atomic structure was not a thing. People lived with their whole families in a unit, sometimes with multiple families, and the whole, mom, dad, two kids in a white picket house fence is a relatively new idea. And people take those cultural norms and see them as intrinsic values as opposed to a choice or a selection of a lifestyle. This whole sex negative attitude does derive from this expectation that getting married to a member of the opposite sex and having a kid or two is what
2, 5, or 6.
It's not true. That's just not true.
So, but they were getting married back in the day, right? I mean, it wasn't.
Sure, but even at the same time, only privileged people could really get married.
Peasants and stuff couldn't get married.
I mean, you could get Jesus said that the power is basically within you should you ask for it. So
yeah,
who's to say that people can't look at each other and say that we're married now in the eyes of God?
That's the main thing. That's the commitment. Yes.
The institution of marriage is very different from two people making the decision that they want to spend the rest of their
I
lives.
agree. Yeah, I agree.
The institution of marriage is really just a big old contract you have to sign that makes it financially inconvenient to get out of.
And it's like led to this thing where we have to let gay people do it when that's impossible, right? Like if it was two guys, bros, looking at themselves in the woods, like poor peasants, like we're gonna get married, they would start laughing to each other.
If anybody wants to get married, more power to them. Again, it's a matter of inclusivity and exclusivity and what that does psychologically to people and how it doesn't enable people to completely take part in a community.
I see. And now you see me on the internet all the time. You kind of know where my head's at. Do you have any questions for me? Or do you?
Yeah, sure.
Or what do you think about me? Or you've said before, I don't know how much you're being serious, but you're dishonest, or you're being, am I a bad faith actor, or what am I, where's my head at, or where's my heart at?
This is really only the second time we've had a verbal conversation face to face, quote unquote. So really the time in between all of that, I only really know you from the Facebook comments. So I have to take those at face value while I also take with a grain of salt.
That's true.
I don't know. I've asked you what you want to see in a society. So you basically said that you're not for gay people and against casual sex or even premarital sex because of your religious inclinations, or is this something that you just believe in intrinsically? Do you believe that that premarital sex, casual sex, and being gay or being trans are against God, or is it just an aesthetic preference?
I think it's I've come to realize it. Like it only makes sense for me, and I kind of had to hear it. And I wasn't brought up in the church. I wasn't raised in that. My dad's like atheist, and I would say it's kind of like science oriented, and so I didn't grow up. So when I started coming to some of these, when I started being open, and I had a few different events that changed me religiously and spiritually. And then I was kind of open to receive certain things, and I would hear some of this stuff, and it just very much clicked. And when I would hear stuff, it's kind of like knowledge. Sometimes you learn something and you're like, I already know this kind of, like it's already in you to know this kind of stuff. If you're led by the right spirit, I think you can understand it. And so the sex stuff, I don't want it to be like illegal to have casual sex, but I don't think it's right. I think I like having conversations, and I like, having an eye on culture and pushing back against some of the degeneracy, whether it be like the Cardi B song and the video, but because I think it only makes sense that the family is the unit of success. Like whatever you may have said, oh, this is a new thing. Well, that's the evolved. I think that's the right way. Like a family, and sure, if you want to have a family living with the Mexican way, with everyone's there, the different generations, I'm not against that. I think that's probably better. Some people like Jesse, he would be like, oh, who cares about that? But I think the family in general is the healthy dynamic, and that's a kid like needing the like, because I look at men and women differently. I don't think we're the same, or there's this fluidity, or women can be inverted and be masculine, which society is trying to do now. I think a man is supposed to be masculine and a woman's supposed to be feminine. And if they're not, they're out of order psychospiritually based off of culture and trauma when they're young. So I think a healthy society has these things in order. And I think sex is like, marriage is looked at as like something virtuous, and not being a slut is looked at something virtuous. Like, things have degraded more and more and more, where there's like, it's kind of like, oh, you're slut shaming, and it's like, yeah, I'm shaming you for being a slut. You're being a whore right now. And I think like a good society, it's not so whorish, not so slutty. And but what I think a good society mainly comes down to is order and safety and order. I don't think when you talk about freedom, and some of these libertarians will talk a lot about liberty, I think liberty is kind of on a spectrum within order. And if you don't have any order, you're not going to have any true liberty. You're going to have wild people forming crazy tribes, trying to take over others, which is kind of what countries are. So, but there has to be there has to be this sort of order and safety for us to like thrive and be at that level you're talking about, that sort of base level where we have enough. And to me, that safety is needed. And as far as the sex and the kid, it's like, I don't think kids, I mean, you can see all the time people, it's like, well, where's your dad? Oh, that's what, okay, well, we found out that's why you're in jail. Or like, I think it's just important to have a father and a mother.
So there's no scientific data that backs that up. There is data that suggests a kid is going to be more successful and better developed if they do have two parents. There's no data that suggests having two dads or two moms is less by any means than having a mom or dad. Now, again, it's a matter of being kind of deducing what your intentions are, what your attitude is. I think some people, including you, do mix up intrinsic values with instrumental values and aesthetic preferences based, or I guess established data, because psychospiritual, that's not necessarily, that's an abstract thing. And yeah, objective reality is abstract, but it's a little bit easier to gather data to see this objective reality that we all can identify interpersonally. If you don't want to be around women that don't present as your idea of feminine, or men that don't present themselves as your idea of masculine, that's your preference. Again, I think it's a matter of, you may say that you don't want laws saying it's illegal to be gay or illegal to have casual sex, but we come from a history where there very much were laws like that were used not just even in the face value of it, but to manipulate and to wield power from a top-down position over people that they didn't like. And a lot of people are motivated by personal emotions and gain, or perceived gain. It's a matter of projecting what your values are, what you think, and how you want a world to be in. Because, yeah, we can go back and forth about what we want that to happen, but what matters is how our society structures these rules and the penalties for breaking these rules.
Yeah, I'm not trying to go crazy into the penalties. Sorry to cut you off. Go ahead. What were you saying?
I'm definitely more of being, Christian. I'm more into rehabilitation, 100% more so than incarceration or even the death penalty.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to make a ton of laws. And you said it before, like, when I'm just saying I got to keep an eye on culture, because not even just for myself, but for the future generations, the future of the world. If I see it like we can't let these social things get too kooky in culture, then I have a responsibility to sort of push back against some. It's not as so much as like, well, I'll go do what I want and I'll get married, and you, if you want to like have sex with, bang guys in the butt behind the McDonald's, that's fine. That's not part of, like, that's your freedom. I'm not trying to have these crazy laws. Like, I was thinking in the ideal world, maybe we would throw gay people off of buildings, but like at the bottom would be one of those mats, like that they jump in, so it feels like a fluffy, like a bounce castle. So it'd be like a fun thing or something. It would just be like it would straight up be what? Peaceful.
It would be a coerced, non-consensual throwing, though. Is that really
Well,
peaceful?
it would be fun though because you hit the bounce, you hit the bounce castle.
Now, if they consent to that and they want to have that fun,
yeah, they'd have to consent to it first. It'd be like you catch the gay guy up on the building, and then you'd be like, "Hey, we got to throw you to the bounce castle."
Throwing people from a building, even if it is fun to you, is not necessarily fun for them, right?
Consensual, yeah, you're right. It'd have to be. That's what I'm saying. You'd have to be like, "Hey, you know this score," and he'd be like, "I know, I'm sorry."
And also the idea of violence, it comes back to like being anarcho-communist of like, I don't believe that the state should have a monopoly on violence like they do right now. They can basically do whatever they want and hide behind laws, or at least the stretching of those statutes. You or I break the rules just a little bit and we get the book thrown at us.
Yeah.
It's all of where you are in the pyramid of power that gives you a little bit more freedom to do whatever you want. Now, unfortunately, people use that freedom with that power in really nefarious ways in this world. So it's a matter of keeping watch on crimes, and we disproportionately prosecute and incarcerate marginalized people,
black people,
100-fold over people with a lot of capital or wealth.
Why are so many black people in get the short end of the stick with the incarceration thing?
Black neighborhoods are disproportionately policed by police precincts, and that's on top of just the tip of the iceberg of history of Jim Crow laws and slavery before that. And, you know, chickens come to roost and problems don't go away if you don't tend to them. So it's a matter of...
They have too many police. They have...
Yeah, black neighborhoods are disproportionately policed, especially in big cities.
And when you talk to like a black grandma in one of these areas, you think she's like, yeah, I want less police because these young black men that are kind of rambunctious, because those are the guys that are doing like, right, isn't it like the young black men are doing, 50% of the crime in the country, getting arrested for it, at least incarcerated?
I mean, I don't know what statistic you're referencing, but go back to this theoretical grandmother. I don't know. What's this grandmother's background?
I would say she's likes to make cookies. She knits and stuff. She's from the old school. She's kind of had it with these thugs out there, and she'd be like, I don't think she'd be like, I want less police. She'd be like, I want some order. This used to be a nice neighborhood. It's getting out of hand. There's a lot of crime and drugs and gangs and people just shooting people in the head.
It's this one theoretical person, and anecdotal evidence isn't even admissible in court. You have to rely on numbers, raw numbers that come through actual reporting of issues and incidents.
Yeah, and the raw numbers are that there's
why are a lot of black men in jail disproportionately?
They're doing so much crime.
There's less economic. People do crime for the majority of reasons because they don't have economic opportunity.
But even when you compare like the worst cities with crime, like whatever, Chicago or Detroit, and you compare those to like poor areas that are more populated, like in South America, we'll still have like a higher rate of crime when it's those dense black areas.
Factors to that, though. More guns in an area, more guns in the whole country. There's more police in these cities than there are in this Latin American place.
But I'm not talking about incarceration. I was talking about crime and murders and stuff like that. There's still a disproportionate amount of murder when you look at other places that are impoverished even more, that have less money and that sort of thing.
So which places are you talking about specifically? I don't know what you're talking about. You're just saying this.
I have to look it up, but I mean, there's like some of the bigger cities in South. If you look up the most dangerous South American cities that are big.
And you're saying that there's more crime in big cities like Chicago than there are in these Latin American
per
cities?
capita, yeah.
I mean, are their populations comparable at all? I think you have to look at all these different factors when comparing statistics.
Sure, I get that. Maybe so.
Yeah, I mean, and also there's also data that backs the ideas that over policing is an issue and it doesn't yield more catching of crime or even stopping of crime. If anything, it makes the situation worse.
What did you think about the whole idea? Do you remember? I wanted to ask you. So, when Amazon had that thing leak about that paperwork, that as far as diversity goes, they want to look at diversity in certain areas as a positive, so they can combat against unionization. What do you think about that? And can you see that on a?
I mean, I've seen Amazon has a history of being anti-union and doing, again, psychological warfare
And part of that
against that.
warfare was like, we want to make this as diverse, like racially and everything like that, culturally, and that will make it harder to unionize. They had like studies that were, that's what they found out, and that's what they were using to their psychological warfare advantage.
Yeah, corporations, their only MO is to maximize profits. So of course it's nefarious. And most corporations weaponize cynically identity politics in their favor, and they don't reflect the general discourse about it or even the people's feelings of it. They use it as a tool to sell more products because it's just a business decision. You want to sell more products to the most people. So why would you alienate somebody for no reason other than their skin color or their cultural background?
Well,
it's a business decision.
I guess I'm looking at it more on a broad spectrum, like this sort of, some people on the progressive side or, the new age of this country in the United States, they look at like this sort of idea of like, they hold like diversity as a great thing, and this sort of idea of rampant like crazy inclusion and multicultural. Do you find that can hinder unity, multiculturalism? As far as like a safe, like when you talk about a healthy community, a nice, healthy, can that hinder sort of a unification when people are speaking different languages, coming from totally different countries, different cultures?
There can be barriers in communication, but at the same time, I think once people are educated in a sense of really knowing your relationship between your labor and people that own the means of production, they're better able to unionize behind their political power in being the most important aspect of a business. Workers. Do corporations use the idea of diversity in a cynical, negative way to disincentivize people from uniting or unionizing? Yes. Is that wrong? I would say so. But do I see anything inherently wrong with diversity or multiculturalism? No, at all. Nothing. No. I think the United States is unique in that realm to where we're like the big world power that is a melting pot, and we kind of have been for a long time now, to where there's just more of a mix of people here as opposed to other countries.
And so are you like, when it comes to immigration, are you like open the borders up, let a lot of immigration in? And do you find that can have any effect on our people that are already here as far as a middle class or like a lower income class? Do you think it makes it worse? Like, what's your stance on immigration?
So just ideally, the dream is to live in a society with open borders, but functionally that's not a realistic possibility anytime soon. Immigration does nothing but help the economic situation in any place, and the data suggests that only too. Immigrants pay taxes. Immigrants don't take adults' jobs. The people that they take jobs from are teenagers and fast food places.
I think in Texas, half the construction workers are illegal immigrants, and when you have all these immigrants come in, it lowers the pay opportunity.
That's not true.
It puts a burden on the growth of pay, I think.
No, people, if anything, they're more willing to pay on the table, and even in that regard, there's no data that suggests immigrants lower the pay generally amongst the country. If you're looking at Texas and individual contractors, you have to look at those individual contractors and their behavior. Immigrants themselves, they're just taking advantage of the economic opportunity in this country and leaving a bad situation from their country. Now,
yeah, I
again,
understand. I understand they want to come here. That's part of the pool, right? Or the push and the pull that we have going on. But um I mean, how many immigrants do you think do you know how many come in illegally usually?
On what basis? We can look this up. There's data on this.
It's usually about
How
a
many
million. It's usually about 1 million people come in legally. Trump kind of cut it
in
in half
how much of a time?
in a
A
year,
year? A day?
in a year.
How many
That's
come
legal.
to the U.S. every year? How many immigrants? How many legal immigrants?
Yeah, it's usually around like 1.2 million, I think. And Trump kind of cut it in half to 600,000.
Okay. I mean, for arbitrary reasons, other than maybe a perceived dislike for other people's countries. Again, this does nothing but hinder economic opportunities or growth for the United States. This is just an economic fact.
Charlie
What?
Kirk
Why do
told
you
you
think?
that?
Why did he say he stopped immigration? Because of the Muslim ban? Was that it?
There's a lot of different little things that sliced away at some of the legal immigration, whether it be like I don't know. I don't remember, like pregnant women can't just come over here on business trips and plop them out anymore. There's just different things, different work visa things and different things added
Every
up. What?
every argument I've heard against immigration, legal or illegal, is not necessarily something that holds up in the light of scientific data. And by science, I mean just putting your hypothesis through a test. And usually that means numbers and double checking these numbers and see if they match your previous hypothesis. And if so, that becomes a conclusion, or even if it doesn't. I think people are against immigration really mainly for cultural reasons, whether they feel threatened or they feel insignificant or they just feel fear of the unknown.
That's the biggest reason to be against it is cultural reasons, because people don't want to have their culture drastically dismantled. You want 150,000 Chinese people coming here every year?
Dismantled about our American culture because of immigrants.
What could be dismantled?
What has been?
Well, I mean, you go to like some of the like sometimes like a poor area, for instance, like with black people, then a bunch of illegal immigrants come into their side of town, and they kind of change the landscape of those people's neighborhood, you know, or just the values change, the demographic changes. If they're coming in and they're voting, they are often less likely to hold the values we have. Specifically speaking, ultimate freedom of speech and Second Amendment, you talk about guns, they often coming from these countries that aren't so hip to that kind of stuff. It's kind of like one of the things we're good at. And people coming from outside, they might be more willing to, that's not such a big deal. If you're just going to give me some money, then maybe I don't care about guns, or I don't care about freedom of speech, ultimate freedom of speech.
Yeah. I mean, I really don't think immigrants are bribed into political positions, and even if they can vote, the example you said about Black community being overtaken by a different culture, again, these are anecdotal, theoretical situations to where has this happened? You have pockets of like Koreatown in LA and big cities like New York, Chinatown, stuff like that. But even like immigrants tend to, particularly if they come in groups, they tend to like stay in their own communities because it is difficult to integrate. Now, different cities have better rates of integration, and whether or not you want to integrate or like stay to yourself, that's your decision. And ultimately, I'm against like forced integration, like they do somewhat in France. But at the same time, it's important to not create an environment to where people are emotionally, if not functionally, incentivized to demonize or make immigrants into this fearful or even nefarious other, which they aren't most of the time. Immigrants are so de-incentivized to create crimes because of how strict the United States government is on immigrants that cause crime or that will do crime. Immigrants aren't any more emboldened to do negative things more so than current citizens or even residents. Like statistically, U.S. citizens do overwhelmingly the majority of crimes and not immigrants.
And I'm not like a immigration scientist or genius by any means, so maybe I'll get some better data points. But yeah, it just doesn't feel right. I mean, it looks like if you look down the road, like if you just in a general sense and you think 2075, and if the country is mainly new, different, like people from other, like everyone's like cultures are different, right? I mean, people in other countries are not anywhere nearly the same as our culture. So if you're letting in tons of different people, won't it have a effect on that culture there? If you're kind of flooding them in?
Cultures are inherently fluid things. They change over time. Now, you can make efforts to preserve it or keep it the same, or make
Exactly.
efforts to change. I don't think, but again, like the United States is a unique situation. We're such a big country with very different demographics, even within the same country. Texas isn't fucking the same as California. California's not the same thing as Maine. Maine's not the same
Yeah,
thing
and
as
that's a cool thing about our country, but it starts to feel like when you talk about corporations and business, it starts to feel like our country is becoming this sort of loading dock, a place of commerce. Like our whole country is just the market, and people just come in to make some money, they leave, maybe send the money home, or they change. It's like, we house, I think, 1/5 of the world's immigrants. It's like, are we just going to be this sort of like marketplace or in this corporate, a lot of it, I feel like, is what you would be against, sort of these corporate people using these immigrants for lower wages to push the profits to the top, cutting out some of these middle class guys, some of these lower income guys that are trying to make money.
But that example of corporations not including middle class guys because the immigrants are here just isn't a factual thing. That doesn't happen. I'm going to have to.
Do you have a citation for that?
But at the same time, it's funny that you're coming to the same conclusions that I am from a completely different background. That what you see as the nefarious bad actors is the corporations taking advantage of unjust power structures. They're going to exploit who they can at the cheapest cost and at who's not going to fight back, or at least incentivized to not shake the boat, so to speak.
Yeah, so if you bring people in that have lived in a lower standard, then they can exploit them.
We're not bringing in a lot of people. We're not bringing people in. Again, this is like a colonial kind of like mindset of saying we're bringing immigrants. Immigrants are coming here. This whole proverbial shipping in immigrants from the federal government, that doesn't happen.
It's a push-pull concept. So we have a incentivized reason.
It's a right-wing fantasy that the government's shipping in immigrants. It's just not happening. Immigrants are coming.
It's the corporations shipping them in through the government loopholes.
They're not, though. That corporations are not spending their resources and their money to ship immigrants in through the federal
lobbyist, probably lobbyist money. Probably they lobby for these laws.
We're getting into like conspiratorial kind of thinking and ideas. These are just not things that are verifiable. Now, whether you believe that those things happen, that's your prerogative. I don't see it. And if feel free to send me anything that would.
I'm going to look into it further. I was trying to read some stuff about it, but let's wrap it up pretty soon. One of the last few things. Why is Charlie Kirk's face so small and beady? What do you think happened there?
We were all born a certain way, I guess. Charlie Kirk's those in his big head are, joyful to look at. I think the whole struggle between, the more neocon right wingers like Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, and the more far right kind of, you'd say ethno-nationalist
dissident.
Nick Fuentes.
Yeah,
Nick Fuentes and his whole crowd's kind of warring against the Ben Shapiro, Charlie Kirk, Turning Point USA crowd because they're not, I guess, nationalist enough, or I guess xenophobic or homophobic enough. And that whole war,
they're not homophobic at all. It's a problem, and they're very much for the immigration stuff. And because actually that you speak on that, if you tune into this episode is going to get released tomorrow or something, but those guys Shapiro and Prager and Dave Rubin are having a cancel con. Have you heard of this tonight? They're having a cancel conference, and they're not even canceled. So Nick's gonna talk about it and be like, "What are these guys doing?"
They'll say they're canceled and then make money off it.
Yeah, it's so stupid.
They're neocons, just like neolibs, have an MO of wanting to make money no matter, by any means necessary. So they don't really believe in anything. They don't. They believe almighty dollar.
And why do you think these neocons are moving to support Biden and like the left. And what do you think about the anti-war? Like, when you look at the left, like on the big scale, I know you're not in that, but why are they so pro-wars? Because Obama just flipped it on them, or what?
So again, the power structures in our have bled into our political structure. With steroids, we have two parties that are supposed to be diametrically opposed, but they're really united in their, again, neocon neoliberal belief in the almighty dollar. The market is the only thing that matters, and it's basically treated as a god that we can't go against. As far as I think a lot of neocons are getting it behind Biden mainly because it's an aesthetic preference. They see Trump as an embarrassment figurehead for the empire. People like Obama, even Bush.
Well, embarrassment. He also called against. He called against the other day the military-industrial complex. He like said, those guys suck.
Oh, yeah.
It's a threat to them.
These people in the highest echelons of power, particularly in the federal government, and even the extra democratic facets of the government, like the CIA or like the FBI, and justices that are appointed and not elected, they all are in their own DC bubble, and they probably believe in America as far as an idea, but they really see, working to preserve the empire in the United States position as the richest country in the world, if not the most militarily armed country in the world, as their main priority. And they see Trump being the figurehead of that as a big issue, and it's really an embarrassment issue. Trump is a perfect straw man for both of these echelons of the Democratic and Liberal Party. They can focus on him being the problem and not just a symptom. Neocons are going to go with Biden because they feel that Biden is close enough to George W. Bush or Reagan, because functionally they
can see their agenda out.
Biden and Obama, they've admitted that they govern as moderate Republicans, even though they're the leaders of the Democratic Party. And because of this unity of the more centrist right-wingers and Democrats, by centrist I mean pro-military and pro-corporation tax cuts and stuff like that. It's just easier. It's easier for them to unify behind someone who's more polite, like Biden, than Trump. Now, personally, go back from what they think. I prefer Biden because in a consistent situations where you have to vote for the lesser of two evils, it's less about who do you want in power and more about who do you want to fight being in power. It's a lot easier to bully and fight liberals in power than it is to bully and fight conservatives, if not straight up fascists in power, because Republicans have a history of being in power and knowing exactly what they want to do and being efficient in passing legislation. The Democratic Party of the past 40 years noticeably does not like to win elections. They don't like to be in power. And when they're in power, even with the supermajority, they don't do anything. And I think that's mainly my cause in calling it politically, is to blight the fire underneath leftists and bring more centrist liberals to the leftists and move the Overton window back to a center as opposed to being basically far right.
Yeah, like you're going to vote for Biden, and if you can get him in there, then you'll have at least a shot at changing the landscape of that within there, right? That's moving the window, having some – yeah, because you were a Bernie guy, and that fell apart. They kind of probably – Bernie was not a strong – I don't think he believes in God. He has no strength.
But he's Jewish. He's Jewish. There's no evidence he doesn't believe in God. He won the first three contests for the first time.
I remember, They stuck it to him.
Ever won New Hampshire, Iowa, and Nevada. He was barreling down the hill towards victory, and then there's debatable things what happened, but a big story came out about how Obama called Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar to drop out and stuff.
Whether they were called or not, they all dropped out at the same time, kind of, and it was very much.
Empire struck back hard that night before Super Tuesday, and then that dream was crumbled. That being said, though, the battle is eternal, and we can't let depressive moments like that get us down, because we know the enemy is always going to be there, whether we win battles or not.
Exactly. So with your faction, your sort of grouping of people, the kind of the Bernie bus, or even the people on the Bernie bus that are sitting next to you, like you got you're on the Bernie bus, and then you got like 6 people in your little area, and y'all are in the back of the bus. I
thought you were saying Bernie or bus, and I got triggered.
No, the Bernie bus. the short bus. It's a shorter one, but you and your 6 friends are in the back. Who y'all looking? Who are you looking forward to?
It's only a short bus because we don't have the funding. You know.
You don't have the funding. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
But who do you look at to? Is there anyone you see as a person that can be a better leader of that sort of movement? Doesn't it take usually a character, a person to sort of push a movement into the bigger atmosphere? And Bernie did that to some degree, but who do you see anyone that can maybe, do you know of anyone that might, or any politician that maybe is going to be able to, or a mainstream analysis person that could maybe push y'all's agenda?
Absolutely. I think Nina Turner is the prime candidate as far as that's concerned. And that's one of Bernie's campaign managers and an Ohio State legislator before that. You should look her up, Nina Turner.
I'll check it out. Cool, man. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Get some more of those line drives and home runs out in the left field. Maybe even a right field. Who knows?
Yeah, you got some home runs. You got some left fielders. You used to play baseball, for real? You're a good baseball player? That's kind of one of my biggest... What?
Third base, Joey Baloney. Was specialized in third base. But, I do play left field whenever I have to.
Third base is a good base. That's kind of one of my regrets. I kind of wish I would have played some baseball or hockey or something. I was more of a soccer, which is football or basketball. But, yeah, appreciate you coming on, man.
I'll be back anytime. This is a pleasure.
All right, cool. Yeah, we'll holler at you. Joey Baloney, everybody.